Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, no matter where you are. Welcome to the UN Plant Based Food System Dialogue. And in this hour, we are going to be talking about spirituality and religion, and with the founders of the Interfaith Vegan Coalition. And I'm going to introduce them to you momentarily. There's Julie Griffin. Welcome,
Hello.
Julie.
Thank you. Welcome.
Judy Carman.
Hi,
Lisa
everybody.
Levinson. And Thomas Jackson.
Hey, glad to be here. Good to see
This
you.
is awesome. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have been talking about the outer world and how things have been progressing and how plant-based system affects the outer world. And now we are transitioning to the inner world and look at what would a completely vegan world look like from a religious and spiritual perspective. And how does it affect our religious practices? How does it affect our inner well-being, the spiritual well-being? So that's going to be the focus of this conversation. And I'm going to begin with you, Judy, because you have written about the commonality of all our religions and how the golden rule seems to be at the core of everything we talk about in religion. So please take it away.
Thank you, SAILESH, and thank you everyone who's listening in. We really appreciate your being here with us. We are, yes, talking about the golden rule, and I think just about everybody's familiar with it. It's a kind of I would say, the highest value that most of us hold. And nearly every religion has its own way of saying the golden rule, which is basically do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And there's just slight differences in the wording in the various religions, but and ethical traditions, but it is almost a universal value held by human beings. So it's so key, I think, to what we're all trying to do to create a better world. I think that the missing piece that has been part of the problem, why we haven't reached that highest goal, that highest level of our nature, our true human nature, is because of our mindset that we've had for about 10,000 years, that it is okay for human beings to dominate nature and animals. And so what we have gotten into is quite a mess, as everybody listening in here knows. And so what we are proposing is, and what I talk about in my book, Homo, Ahimsa, and ahimsa means, it's a Sanskrit word for non-harm. So it's the perfect expression of the golden rule. And so what we're proposing here is that we extend the golden rule out to include all beings and all of nature. And once we do that, we are going to see some real progress.
So to me, that sounds really key, to be able to extend the golden rule out to all beings, from just human beings. But we know that there are a lot of our rituals involve not extending the golden rule to other beings. A lot of religious rituals. Or is that a misinterpretation of religion, misinterpretation of our sacred texts?
That is something I think that all religions many are working on, I should say, not all, but I think it's a growing awareness that we need to really look carefully at all of our dogmas and our rituals and see, okay, do those do harm to other beings other than humans? And if they do, then how is that living by the golden rule? It's not. But we are looking at years, thousands of years of cultural programming that we, as I said, have the right to dominate all these creatures, which is the actual opposite of the golden rule. We do not have that right. Animals want to be free, just like we do. They want to be able to love their children and not be separated from their children, as we do with dairy cows and, well, every single animal you can think of that has been dominated by human beings. Not to mention all of the wild animals who are suffering from our domination of nature and becoming extinct. So yes, we have to work hard as religions and as ethical traditions and spiritual people to modify our rituals to reflect who we really are. We really are loving creatures that have been kind of taken over by this idea that we have the right to dominate. We know better. We know that we don't. And we're wanting to go back to the garden, so to speak, and live by the golden rule and extend that golden rule. And so we could take, and I think Lisa is going to talk more about this, but we could take a specific ceremony that you do in your own place of worship and modify it and say, does this do harm? Does this reflect a bad concept of animals or an idea about animals that we can dominate them or nature? If it does, we need to change it.
Right. So Lisa, you have an example of a ritual that completely reflects this domination and that needs to be changed, and how we can change it.
Sure, yeah, there's a few, but first of all, there's one that happened recently. So some of us, especially in the Jewish community, like myself, are familiar with a ritual called kaporos or kaparo, and this ritual it's extremely a cruel ritual where it goes along with the Yom Kippur holiday, which is an atonement for our sins, and it's to do that in a ritual way. The sins are placed into, metaphorically, I guess, into a chicken, and then the chicken is swung above the head of perhaps a child or another person that the community wants to bless, and then the chicken is literally sacrificed. So this happens like every year in certain communities in the United States, in Brooklyn, and also a couple places in Florida and a couple places in the Los Angeles, California area. And they're activists who have been very dedicated to oppose this ritual from Jewish Veg and from other groups, primarily in New York City. And they've designed, in a way, they're kind of creating a new ritual around this very cruel ritual, which is to offer water and also to offer watermelon to these animals who are suffering during this time. They have animals who have been on factory farms who, were destined for slaughter, but they're wind up in the middle of this ritual where they're dragged around, grabbed forcibly by their wings, and then experience this very terrifying ritual, which is very different from anything they've ever known. They haven't had probably a lot of contact with people. So this really cruel event that happens every year is completely unnecessary, even in the liturgy. The idea is that you can use coins instead of actual living beings, where you can have And that's another way to do what we call a compassionate cup of roast. And so that's what we could encourage instead. And if we look back in time, a lot of the animal sacrifice really has to do with what was valued in the community, 2,000 years ago. It might have been the commodity. Animals have been treated as commodities, as if they were money. And so we can actually very easily these days replace the animals with actual money, which we have access to and doesn't involve any suffering. So the idea of per capita actually comes from, I believe in Latin it means per head, which comes directly from animals. So our currency is reflected in this domination that Judy discussed a little bit earlier. So this is time. It's time to change that equation of meat equals money, and that is really an ancient and barbaric kind of value system. And now we can switch to the current currency, which is the physical money, the coins. So that's something that can be done with kaporos and is done in some communities. And also we have other kinds of rituals that are, like I mentioned, there's the witnessing ritual within the Kaporos ritual that activists have created to honor the animals who are suffering. But we also have ways to celebrate animals. So I know our Vegan Spirituality and Interfaith Vegan Coalition, we're hosting a retreat shortly, and we're going to be doing a blessing of the animals. And that's a really nice tradition that comes out of Catholicism. But we do have a new one that we've created, which honors animals and involves providing healing to the animals, like a Reiki kind of ceremony, which is a hands-on healing technique, and also honoring the ways that they have suffered and the ways that we can uplift the animals in our current day. So, and visualizing a vegan world. So there are new rituals that we can co-create to celebrate our relationships with animals.
Yeah, and Lisa, we might mention so people can find the Interfaith Vegan Coalition, and we have on that website we have the 10 steps of to bring vegan values. I'm reading it of compassion, nonviolence, and justice to your place of worship. So we've got 10 steps that you can take in your church or temple, wherever it is that you worship, and use these steps to bring the vegan values in. And there's one of the ideas is to host films and speakers and book study groups about veganism, so that more people can learn, well, what is veganism? How do we extend the golden rule out to all beings and to all of nature? And how does this impact us personally on a soul level? And also, how does it help the church or the place of worship actually make an impact on creating a better world for everyone, a more loving, nonviolent world? This is really one of the responsibilities of places of faith. And so I know you all are looking for ways to do that. And of course, to create a better world, a world that can actually survive with all that human beings have done to it at this point. How do we reverse all that? And we need the places of worship to step up and help with that. And a big part of that is extending this circle of compassion, this golden rule, to the entire world, not just to human beings. Because as long as we limit it to us, we're not going to get anywhere. So I just wanted to mention that you can find that flyer on the IVC website, and you can look that up by Googling Interfaith Vegan Coalition, and then look for the flyers that we have available that you can order. Or you can just look at it, study it, and get some ideas from it.
Yes. So we do also, I know that Judy mentioned the 10 steps to help veganize your place of worship, which are kind of generalized steps. And our Interfaith Vegan Coalition also has some vegan advocacy kits, which you can find on our website, interfaithvegancoalition.org. And they're religion specific, so that if you want to go to if you're Catholic and you want to go to the priest and talk to this person about how do we bring in some vegan values into our place of worship, then there's all kinds of ideas. There's prayers, stories, there are images and idea activities. There's just a plethora of resources for you to bring to your spiritual leaders. And we also have the same type of kit, but with a different focus and different content for each tradition. So for Buddhism, for Judaism, for Islam, for all of the major and some of the minor world religions, and practices. So we would really encourage everybody, if you want to get the tools and the nuts and bolts to actually do this in your community and help to transform your places of worship into more vegan-friendly places, then we've got what you're looking for. We've got these kits, and they're already put together. So I've noticed that I've spoken with different advocates, and they'll tell me, wow, I have been working on this brochure for years, trying to get it out to my place of worship. And I'll let them know, well, we've already created all of that for you, and you're welcome to use those. It makes life a little bit easier for all of our wonderful advocates out there.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. Thomas, you have been talking to a lot of religious leaders in your in creating your movies. So what wisdom do you have to share on how we can make sure that when we get to a plant-based food system, we are still consistent with our religions?
Well, the good news is that all the religions that I studied are all in alignment. At least their teachings of compassion are all in alignment with a vegan diet. So that's the good news. So it's not gonna, I didn't see any religion I studied that said you cannot be vegan, so there's no forbidding veganism, and actually the teachings of compassion actually encourage you to live that way. So I don't think that's going to be the problem. What I have learned, though, is that at least in the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition, and more of the Western traditions, you can look through the Bible and through the Torah and things, and you can find places where you are given permission to eat meat. I mean, that's just there. That's the whole thing. Like, there are moments, but if you look in the context they're in and everything else, it's there. But at the very beginning of the Bible, it tells us to be vegan. And then and after the flood, we're given a little reluctant permission where the Bible says, God's saying man has been evil from his youth, and the fear of dread is going to be placed in the animals. Before the flood and before we started eating animals, we had a more kinship with the animals. We were more like, brothers and sisters in a way. We're all connected. And then once you started eating, the fear and dread were placed in these animals. But then in Isaiah, we come back to the peaceful kingdom where, the wolf and the lamb will lie together, and there'll be no more murder. There'll be no more bloodshed. So all that's there, but I think for me, like, the other thing to take into consideration, if you look at the Bible and you want to take the Bible literally, you can find ways to justify slavery. You can actually find ways, there's laws that say that if your child backtalks you or is disrespectful, you can kill them, you can stone them, as well as if you don't go to the temple on the Sabbath or something. So you can find things to justify everything. But I think if you look at the spirit of the law, like Jesus talked about the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, if you look at the spirit of the law and you look at what really all of especially the founders in the beginning of all the traditions, I mean, they're really teaching compassion. They're teaching us to take care of the planet. They're teaching us to take care of our body temples. They're teaching us to take care of other people and animals. All of the traditions had these four things in common, just as they had the golden rule in common. They all have that in common. So I think when it comes to religion, and the reason I made the film too, is I had a feeling like, religious and spiritual people are already very compassionate. So they're like low-hanging fruit. And if they really look at the teachings, you know, and really go to their heart and pray and meditate on it, you know, I think they would have a different view. I mean, the other thing I like to tell people too, like, you know, imagine if Jesus came back today and we took him to a slaughterhouse. Like, how would he feel about that? And knowing what was going on with the planet and with the human health and with the workers that are being exploited, all of these different things, I just cannot see how they are in alignment with any spiritual tradition, especially the way we do it now. Most of these traditions were written at another time where it wasn't, animals weren't so much of they were always a commodity at this point, but you know, we really exploit them by the billions today. So it's unsustainable, and it definitely is not in alignment with our true compassionate natures or with any teachings of compassion that any of the traditions I studied.
Yeah, I know you have spoken a lot with the Imam Sohaib Sultan and of the Muslim tradition, who sadly passed away earlier this year. So I would like to honor him and play one of his clips. But tell me about him. You know, I mean, I haven't met him at all.
You know, I only had the pleasure of meeting him in person once, and he was a beautiful being. I mean, if you see the video, you'll see he shined. He had energy that was just very, he just felt like he was very present with you, and he felt very loving. And I learned a lot from him. And yeah, and just in that one day, you know, and then going back and looking at everything he talked about, you know, spending time with him. I know him, I know what he said more than I know the person. And but the more I spend time with his words and with him speaking and his energy, the more I just know he was a very special human being. I sent this clip to you because we were talking about sacrifice, and I remember him telling me this, and I couldn't put it in the movie. So I think, you know, you can listen to him talk about the symbolism behind sacrifice and how we no longer meet that when we sacrifice animals. Yeah, I'll tell you one other thing about sacrifice that, and the Christian tradition is that whenever, I guess it was Hebrews 10 verse 6, it says that God takes no pleasure from these sacrifices. And then in verse 8, it says Jesus was the last sacrifice. So, I mean, as far as the Christian tradition, there should be no more sacrifices. I think it really got rid of the sacrifices, but it's only in the, it still exists in the Jewish and the Muslim traditions in some form. But what he was saying is that these traditions symbolically are about sacrificing the ego. You know, when he was asked to sacrifice Isaac, his son, it's like asking to sacrifice his ego. Are you going to show the clip, or am I going to?
Yeah, I'll show it. I'm sorry, it just
I won't
me
wrap
out
up
in the middle.
He said it a lot better than I did. So
right, yeah.
The times in which Muslims will consume a lot of meat, not only as a dietary practice, but also as almost a religious ritual, will be during at the end of the pilgrimage season, during the time of Eid al-Adha, which means the festival of sacrifice. And that story that is commemorated every year is a story in which Abraham has a willingness to sacrifice his son, whether it was Ishmael or Isaac is a difference of opinion in the tradition. And instead of sacrificing his son, God replaces that with the sacrifice of a ram. There is the sacrifice of a ram, sacrifice of animal, and animals' meat is distributed to the poor, neighbors, and to one's family. And so it shows a sense of care and concern for the poor, for one's neighborhood, and for one's own family. And I think that along the way, people have probably forgotten what the spirit of the story is all about. That Abraham, in his willingness to sacrifice his son, was willing to sacrifice his ego, because his son was very much attached to his ego. And the story is about ego sacrifice. It's not about human sacrifice. And in God saving his son from being sacrificed and instead offering a ram, it's not about the ram, but it's about this idea of sacrificing in a way that benefits the poor, that benefits one's neighborhood, and that benefits one's family. And if we're looking at the world we live in today, what we find is that the way that animal exploitation is happening, we're actually hurting the poor, we're actually hurting our neighbors, and we're actually hurting our families, and we're hurting ourselves. And so there is, I think, a window and opportunity for us to reconsider what that story of sacrifice was about, number one, and two, how we honor it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
In fact, in the Hindu tradition, the same sort of principle is behind breaking a coconut. That represents the ego. We break a coconut and then let the coconut water flow out. That represents the fluid mind that has doubts about God, right? And then we actually use the coconut and make a sweet dish out of it to give to others. This is called the prasad that we give to others. Yeah, it's the same ideas.
Yes, it's amazing how all of these different traditions have come up with these alternate kinds of rituals.
We have the blessing of the animals. A lot of Christian churches do that around St. Francis Day. And it's usually just relating to pet animals, companion animals like dogs and cats, and a few birds and fish. But that also can be extended out to include all animals, farmed animals, animals people eat, on perhaps that very same day of the blessing of the animals. So yeah, that's a good step forward. It just needs to walk a little bit farther forward to include all animals.
That is what we do at our blessing of the animals at our retreats, is we do extend that circle of compassion wider and wider so that we can open our hearts wider and wider to all of the animals. So thank you, Judy, for mentioning that. And there's another holiday that's actually a new one, and let's see, a recycled one that's been around in the Jewish tradition. There's a few different holidays that are associated with a new practice, and one of them is going to be rebranded as the New Year for the Animals. And I know that Richard Schwartz is working on this and trying to broadcast this new holiday. So I think there are people out there who are trying to effect change in this really beautiful way to include the animals in the rituals that we participate in our different traditions.
Yeah, speaking of which, including creating change and including animals in our compassion requires courage to go against the grain. And so, Julie, how would we muster that courage?
Wow.
Yeah.
We are so much creatures of habit and rituals that go back from childhood. And many of the rituals, maybe they served a purpose for a time, but they become outdated quickly. I want to tell you a story. It's called the roast beef story. Not that I condone eating roast beef, but this is the roast beef story of this woman was in her kitchen Sunday after Sunday making roast beef, because that's what she did after church. She would come home and make a roast beef dinner, etc. I think many of us have had that kind of a Sunday regularly in our homes. So she would make the roast beef, and her husband watched her incredulously every single week as she took the roast beef that they paid good money for and that an animal died for, and they cut the ends, each end off, and she just tossed them in the garbage, the ends of the roast beef, threw them away. The husband would say, "What are you doing? You can't be throwing away good meat. That's crazy." And she's like, "Well, that's how it's done." He's like, "What do you mean that's how it's done?" "That's how it's done. That's how my mother did it. That's how my grandmother did it. That's how you make a roast beef. You cut off this end and that end. You've got to have a better reason than that," he tells her. So she says, "I don't know." He said, "Well, call your mother and ask her. Ask her if she still does that and why she does it." So she calls the mother, and the mother says, "Well, that's just how it's done. That's how my mother did it. That's how we do it. We do what we were taught. We automatically do what we were taught, and that is how you make a roast beef. I'm sure of it. If my mother did it that way, and your grandmother did it that way, it's got to be right." So the husband just couldn't let it go. He could not see the waste of animal flesh, and he could not see the waste of money. So he made his wife called the grandmother. And the grandmother, when asked, why do we cut off the ends of the meat before we put it in the pan? And she burst out laughing. What's funny, Grandma? Well, I just do that so it'll fit in the pan, she said. So it wasn't about making a better roast beef. It was about that one woman making a roast beef that had a pan that was a little too small. So she cut off the ends and threw it in the garbage. And that was it. But because of tradition, because of following the leader, and we all do this to some degree, they were wasting meat. And, week after week, it was happening in people's homes, in this family. So what we need to ask ourselves is, why do we do things that don't make any sense? Why do we do things that are hurtful to other beings? Why do we put blood on our plates and on our hands by serving up things that are not as good as if we went out to the garden and got a nice basket full of delicious vegetables and fruits? Why are we eating this way? The only reason is because we have been doing it over and over and over. So yes, we need the courage to change. We needed the courage yesterday. We needed it a decade ago. We need it at church. We need it in our family homes. We need to break free of traditions that don't make any sense, whether it is taking a defenseless animal and projecting your sin on them and killing it and serving it to your children, or whether it's just simply doing what your beloved mother and grandmother did. Because I know I grew up in a restaurant. My grandmother, who I loved and still love deeply, had many restaurants in her lives, but one in particular, and it was full of delicious food, and it would be very easy to be hypnotized by that smell, and there was all these feel-good associations. So in fact, we are all in kind of a bad food trance. We are led to believe that something will make us feel better, comfort foods. We need to change. We need to open our eyes and say, gee, maybe that sandwich that I just saw in an advertisement in a store window in a coffee shop, I'm not going to name it because I'm not going to give it any credibility, but I saw advertised in the store a macaroni and cheese grilled cheese sandwich. Now, does that sound like something anybody should eat? But, we're indoctrinated into this through ads, through all kinds of things. So the first thing to do, I think, to have courage is to maybe come out of the bad trance that we've been in, where we've been automatically following the wrong advice, or doing what other people do, or thinking we need something to feel better. We don't need comfort foods. We need to feel comfortable in our own skin. We need to feel love, self-love. We need to ask ourselves, is this food I'm about to eat going to help me, or is it going to hurt me? Is this food I'm about to eat going to give me energy, or is it going to rob me of energy? Is this food I'm about to eat, is it spiritually sound? Does it cause harm to other beings? Does it cause death and destruction and poverty? And does it cause our whole planet to be taken down a few notches every time it happens? Is this food I'm about to eat going to give me energy or rob me of energy? Is it spiritually sound? Would I want my children to eat this food? Will it help my children, or will it hurt my children? And now, most importantly, is it going to destroy the planet if we keep eating this way? So I think courage starts with having the courage to open your eyes, open your ears. Like so many of us are seeing without seeing. Like we have to know that animal flesh that's in that white styrofoam package with the clear plastic shroud, we have to know that is a dead animal that was imprisoned and tortured. And we have to know this, whether we're spiritual beings, whether we're church leaders, we have to know this. And we have to have the courage to say, gee, let's stop that potluck we have every Sunday. Because after we talk about do no harm and loving kindness and thou shalt not kill, it doesn't kind of mesh up when there's a whole bunch of animal parts on the table. We have to have the courage to say that. And sadly, there's no nice way to say that. Just like I've had to have the courage to say, I'm not allowing any animal products in my home, and I also don't allow any alcohol in my home. Now, that might make me unpopular, but I've empowered myself to say that because it's best for the people who are around me not to do those things. And it's best for me not to see those things. So sometimes the right thing to do is to just rip the veil off yourself, just wake up and say, I have a right to have things spiritually congruent around me. I have a right to expect people who come into my home to kind of have my rules and to live the way I want to live in my own house. It's like when they talk about on an airplane, if in the event of an emergency, oxygen mask will drop from the ceiling and you put your own mask on first before you assist anyone else. Now that might seem harsh and uncaring, but we all have to do that. We have to do that with our families. I have to say to my family, I'm sorry, I'm not coming home for Thanksgiving anymore. Unless you can come to my house and I'll make vegan, but I can't watch this anymore. I can't watch it because it's harmful. It's harmful on so many levels. And I think I just did it. I think I just told my family that. And that was a hard thing for me. It takes courage. But as you change, the people around you change. As you live your truth, it becomes easier for people to have the courage to live their truths. And to me, that's what it's about. It's about really seeing and questioning the rituals, the ritual of the potluck, the ritual of the all-you-can-eat buffet, the ritual of on and on and on with bad rituals. Is this going to help me or is this going to hurt me? What do you guys think?
Yeah, courage is the first of all the virtues.
Yeah, and I have some tools I can share that will help with getting up your courage. I was a practicing medical and clinical hypnotist for 30 years. And yes, I'll warn you, I can be very persuasive, but I know I can't change anyone that doesn't want to change. So it's not about that. It's about sharing some tools and techniques you can use on yourself or you can encourage other people to use. We know as hypnotists that some people move away from pain when you're helping them. Like they don't want to think something bad is going to happen to them. So by focusing on the bad things that could happen if they don't make the change, that might give them the courage to make the change. Some of us focus on the reward system. What will I get for this? Like so many people lose weight and get fit before a wedding because they want to look good at the wedding. Those are the motivated to change for positive reasons. Some people, they will suddenly do something very differently. Like my husband, for example, he had 3 malignant melanomas, and they were threatening his lives. And he read Dr. T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, and he learned that animal products feed cancer cells, whereas vegan food and plant-based meals do not. So that's all he needed to hear. He did not want to die. And right there, he became first a vegetarian and very soon after a vegan. That was it for him. It was easy. He moved away from the pain and the thought of pain towards staying alive. It wasn't about getting dressed up and going to a wedding to him. It was about staying alive. So maybe if you have somebody with a health problem, you might encourage them, well, this will help you stay alive. You have to kind of appeal to your own and things. So I was thinking about the fact that I was able to go out and pick an apple off the tree. And maybe that wouldn't have been as interesting to me before I became a vegan. But I can remember as a child even, biting into an apple off the tree was very delicious, just like going to pick strawberries or blueberries. The great thing about going vegan is your sense of taste comes back. Right now, your sense of taste, if you're not vegan, it's probably covered in salt and chemicals and preservatives. So food is going to taste much better to you. Vegetables and fruits will taste better to you. So that's a benefit. You will feel younger. You will probably lose weight as a vegan. You will have more time, more energy, because you won't be standing in takeout food lines all the time. You'll be making food at home that's wholesome. There's all kinds of benefits besides not dying, not having clogged arteries. Those are all good things. But again, that's the negative list. Now, what are the negatives? Again, we're trying to help people figure out what they need to do to get the courage to make the change. So the negatives might be, well, the way the world is eating is killing our planet. It's killing our planet. I'm sure SAILESH talks about that all the time. You know, it's great that we have people that have the statistics on that. But on the negative, you hear all these ya buttles. You know what a ya buttle is? A ya buttle is when you say to somebody something important and they immediately come up with an excuse. Yeah, but I would love to be a vegan. Yeah, but my kids won't do it. Yeah, but my husband won't do it. Yeah, but I really like chocolate. And they don't even know that that can be made vegan. So come up with a list, one list of what'll happen if I don't change my way of living to a plant-based diet. What'll happen? Will my children have a future? Will my grandchildren, will my nieces and nephews have a future if I don't make this change? There's a long list. What will happen to my health? Will I be fitter? And then on the positive list, there's more creativity. And you are more in touch with the light force that is God, that is spirit, that is nature. You are more in touch when you are not harming others, when you're acting lovingly. Does that make sense?
Perfectly.
Yeah. And it's really that simple. And the thing I want to comment on, we're talking about all these rituals. Rituals, they need to be good. They need to serve us. And most of the rituals are based around people sinning, around people being bad or thinking they're evil. Why not have a whole new dialogue where instead of focusing on sins and the past sins, why not think about what we can do to make the world a better place, to be better people, to bring love and light and joy into the world? That is so much better than focusing on rituals and repenting and all this stuff. You know, the way to repent is to not need to repent. You know, it's to be happy, to be bright, to be kind. So have the courage, say what you need to say, find your voice, find your heart. Let animals and life and our planet and your children's lives be more important to you than that food buffet, or standing in line at Dunkin' Donuts, or going to any of these steakhouses, or any of the crazy things that people do, or eating like 16 kinds of animal flesh at one holiday. Let being healthy and happy and having a planet to live in be the goal. Let kindness be the rule. Let joy emanate from your heart at such a level that you don't need excess food, that you would not dull your senses with rotting, decomposing flesh of tortured animals. Why would you do that when you can eat a strawberry or a peach or a watermelon or a salad? Why would you eat rotting, decomposing flesh of tortured animals? It's insane to me. So let's be love, let's be light, let's think clearly and act in our own best interest, in the interest of our children, and the air, seas, and skies, and the world, and our own consciousness. Let's focus on being part of humankind instead of just human being. You know, we're human beings. We should be humans doing good things. Let's be humankind. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Julie. That brings it right back to you, Judy, with homo ahimsa. That is humankind.
Yeah, Julie, that was just such a wonderful message. And yeah, that's homo ahimsa, which SAILESH talks about as well, is again the homo ahimsa, meaning non-harm, the non-harming human, the kind human that you're talking about. And I think that one of the things that you touched on, Julie, that has really resonated with me for a long time is that once you do become vegan, I have known a lot of people who went vegan maybe for health reasons, and what they discovered was that their heart started expanding, and their feeling of love for all beings began expanding, and tears would well up in their eyes when they heard about the suffering, even though they started out with it for health reasons. And so I believe from that, and from just many stories I've heard, that it changes us on a spiritual level, on a very deep spiritual level, when we stop eating the flesh of tortured animals who have been tortured their whole lives, really. And especially dairy and eggs, these mothers whose babies have been taken away from them every single time, until then they finally can't produce any more milk for human beings and are slaughtered themselves. And this is unconscionable. I didn't know it when I was growing up. I thought we had to drink milk, and my mother thought that cows had to be milked because otherwise they'd be in pain. And so I think a lot of us grew up with those crazy ideas that we were just passed down generation to generation, like you were talking about. And then we find out, no, wait, that milk belongs to those babies and not to people, and it causes harm to people. And so all these things, we need to question everything and look at all our traditions, all our rituals, all our ideas that are in our head. Where did they come from? Are they real? Do they make any sense? Like you were saying. And so, yeah, we're at a point in our evolution, or whatever you want to call it, our development, when human beings can go from being Homo sapiens to Homo ahimsa. We're there. This is it. And everyone, I think, who's alive today was born for this wonderful moment in time when we can make this ascension, a literal ascension to a higher level of being, and become the loving creatures that we truly are in our hearts. Yes, I totally agree with you, Julie. Thank you so much for your presentation.
And we have so many tools too now that people didn't have who were going vegan 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. All these foods, since people are slaves to their taste buds, there's so many foods that you can get that replicate food. I'm not recommending them, but I'm just saying they're there. And there's so many YouTube videos and other videos and sources, like you guys all share so brilliantly and so lovingly. There are sources. You can get help. You can let this be easy. You can decide, even if no one around you goes along with this, that you're going to dig your heels in and do what's right for you and your children and your family and the world. Because all you can do is control yourself, but you can take that control. You can have that courage. You can, if you're a pastor, you can say at your church, sorry, no more potlucks except for vegetables. If you're running a food kitchen for the poor, same deal. It's better for them. Do what is right. We all know what's right. We're just afraid to face it sometimes. But this is the time we must face it. We have a world to save. We have families to save. We have ourselves to save. And we're worth it. And our world is certainly worth it.
On that note, thank you so much. And then, Thomas, did you want to add something to that? What the stories that we need to tell before we close out?
Honestly, I want to ask you how you're doing, man. I know you've been doing this all day. Like, I've been wanting to ask you the whole time. Are you holding up, man?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
It's my duty to serve all of you.
Yeah, you are a master storyteller. You know, I'm editing the film the new film, and I'm in India now. I'm up to halfway through India, so I've been listening to a lot of what you say, and you tell these amazing stories, and you really put these issues in a story into a way that people can really hear them and understand them. I think the most thing is that when it comes to our stories is we really got to emphasize the compassion, and we really got to update anything that is not taking into consideration what's happening on the planet and what's happening to human health and all of these things. Like, we really need to incorporate these into our stories so our children will avoid all of these, you know, so they won't destroy the planet in the way we have.
Right.
Yeah.
And heal the planet, like
Heal the
Lisa.
planet.
So thank you all very much. It's been inspiring as always. I could spend hours with you talking about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Thank you.